how it contributes to our function. And motion, function, we need it to move for us to be able to do some things. So what is that motion called? How does it move? How does it help? How does it contribute? Okay? So the spine is made up of a bunch of, I like to look at them as floors, like on a skyscraper. You have different levels, right? And you work your way up. Actually, it's kind of in reverse. Floors, you start at 1, and then you work your way up 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Spine is kind of the opposite. You start at 1 at the bottom, and you work your way down. So it's kind of like an inverse floor, but the concept is the same. If you're going to build in Delcom, I don't think we have any building taller than 2 stories, because anything higher would probably like sink into the ground. But if you're going to build tall buildings, you have to have a solid foundation to handle all of that weight, right? That kind of makes sense. New York and Chicago, that's built on bedrock, very sturdy ground. And that's what your spine is built upon. This right here, your fused sacrum. They're fused vertebra, synarthrotic, remember the fused vertebra? So they're not going anywhere. It's a nice solid bedrock to build things that will sway and have motion from. Okay? So you have these fused vertebrae that serve as a solid foundation. And then it makes sense that the first vertebra is going to be the densest one, the biggest one, because it has to support all the stuff on top of it. And then the one on top doesn't have to be as dense. I'm not saying it's an extreme, but it doesn't have to be, because all it has to do is handle the stuff on top of it. So technically it should make sense. As you work your way up, the vertebrae are going to get less and less dense until you get to the top, when all it's got to do is hold up your head. That's not as much as the one at the bottom, the L4, L5, that has to hold up all of your trunk stuff. Okay? What we gain in stability, we lose in mobility. So the trade-off is as we work our way up our floors and we become less dense, we become more mobile. And as we work down, we get more dense, we become less mobile. Which again, makes a lot of sense. The more you have to hold, the kind of less you can move around. And you get to these little guys up here, not very dense, because they don't have to hold a lot of stuff. We get a lot more mobility up here. Okay? The concept of the vertebra is really cool. We have to allow a little bit of motion, but yet we can't provide too much motion because we have to protect a lot of things that run through the naturally forming canals that the vertebral processes create. Nerves and arteries and all kinds of very important wiring that run through here that need protection. You can't move too much or you're going to pinch off those pipes and wires, and that's a bad thing, right? So we have to give some, but we can't give too much. So how we talk about vertebral motion is we break it off into 2 sections. The first section is going to be cervical motion. Cervical motion made up of the cervical vertebra. How many of those do we have? How many cervical vertebrae do we have? 7. So think of it, you can think of it in a few ways. You can think of it as if you were, as a kid, playing with dominoes, like I used to do at my grandma's house. I didn't know how to play dominoes, but I'll stack them up and knock them over. And as you stack up the dominoes to knock them over, that gets boring after a while, so you start trying to change direction on the dominoes. And one thing you notice right away is that if you're trying to change direction, let's see if we have any chalk. Yes. If you're trying to change direction of a domino, let's say I'm looking over the top of the dominoes, and I go 1 domino, 2 domino, 3 domino, I can't do this to change direction to the dominoes. And that's not going to cut it. If you're going to change direction of knocking over dominoes, it has to be a gradual change. It can't be one rotating 90 degrees above the other. It has to be a gradual change. This domino, this domino, this domino. A gradual change will allow the dominoes to change direction. But it has to be the summation. It has to be little bits, like save up change. One day of change may not be significant, but several days of change can make a good weekend. It's the same thing with the cervical vertebra, with the whole vertebra, is that it's summative effect. We have a special name for these types of joints, but in essence, they're kind of like gliding joints, but they're specialized gliding joints. You do a lot more motion because there's a lot more dominoes to move. Another analogy I like to use is the slinky analogy. So even if the slinky is one continuous piece of metal or plastic, the individual rungs can kind of be looked at separate slices, right? And again, you could slinky and bend it to change its direction, but all of that motion didn't come between one or two rungs. It was the sum total of little motions of all the rungs. Okay? It's kind of how the spine works. It's kind of like having a slinky. And we can go frontal, sagittal, and transverse. Okay? So, in terms of actual specific vertebra, everyone is different. It's like we're all different. But they group them into categories: cervical, thoracic, lumbar. And you know where that difference comes from is ribs. No ribs, ribs, no ribs. Okay, so that's how they get their group names: cervical, thoracic, lumbar. In terms of cervical motion, we are going to separate them into two groups: cervical by themselves, and then thoracic and lumbar work together to move the torso. So we're just going to call that trunk. So you're going to have to know that trunk motion is the combination of my dominoes or the slinky, that is lumbar contribution and thoracic contribution. Okay? Obviously, thoracic gets more motion than lumbar. Now, thoracic kind of gets a bad rep because we look at these ribs and we like, the ribs must splint the thoracic vertebra, and that's not true at all. Just because you have ribs there doesn't mean the thoracic vertebra can't move, because these ribs don't go bone to bone, man. This is cartilage here, and that's why it's cartilage, just so that it can move about each other and kind of twist and bend. It's like plastic. This is like plastic. So the thoracic vertebrae definitely move about each other. Okay? So it's not like you go movement and then all of your motion is at your lumbar. Thoracic vertebrae contribute to motion. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how the summative effects of these vertebrae can summate motion sagittally, frontally, and transversally. Summative motion in the sagittal plane is going to contribute to our fetal and our feet, right? Flexion and extension. What does hyperflexion mean? Excessive, like maybe someone doesn't have their head up for a tackle. Hyperflexion, excessive. Hyperextension, excessive, same concept. So we have flexion and extension of the cervical vertebra. That's neck stuff, head stuff. Now, you may, if you go on to graduate school, you're going to learn more about the story. Just because I don't tell you the whole story doesn't mean I'm lying to you. It's just there's a lot of story involved here. What I mean by that is not all the vertebrae contribute the same. So think of it as a sports team, and you have some athletes who might contribute more than other athletes. So some are role players, some are superstars. And so in the cervical vertebra especially, you have certain articulations that contribute more to the transverse plane, but everybody contributes some. So we kind of look at it as a team. Even the flexion and extension, most of your flexion and extension happens literally between the occipital bone and your first cervical vertebra. But others contribute as well. They just maybe don't contribute much. So that's some cool stuff you may learn in graduate school because you may need to know these things. For the purposes of this class, we're just looking at it as a team. In other words, if we say the Pelicans won, it's irrelevant who had 24, if Zion had 24, and Ingram had 20. You know, it's just, this is what the team did. So that's how we're going to look at cervical motion and trunk motion. In other words, it doesn't matter for the purposes of this class who contributed more or less. It's that everybody contributed some. Okay? So, flexion and extension motions are going to get us in the fetal and out of fetal. Cervical flexion, cervical extension. Let's look at some illusions. It looks like it's moving, and it is, but that's not an illusion. That's a 3-foot putt. It looks like it's not moving, and it's not. Yay. It looks like it's not moving, but it is. That would be something like this. Y'all are probably too young for this, but there was a movie when I was growing up called The Karate Kid. And Daniel LaRusso, he was being taught by Miyagi, and he went to bow, and I said, Miyagi smacks him upside the head. He's like, look, I always look at. And so Daniel had to learn to keep his eyes up, right? So let's analyze that motion. For Daniel to keep his eyes up, let me freeze my cervical vertebra and then bring it back to anatomical position. He had to extend his cervical vertebra. His body, his hips are flexing, and if he keeps his cervical vertebra in anatomical position, it's going to go along for the ride, and he's going to look down. So how does he keep his eyes up? He extends at the exact same angular velocity that his hips are flexing in order to keep his eyes level. Keeping your eyes level is useful, people. Your body wants data, and it wants data the way it can handle the data. Here's a silly example of how you can't really handle data very well. If you try to play kickball like this, probably fall over. You're not used to handling data with your eyes not level. And just like a car has shocks to keep it level, just like I used this analogy last week, bartenders and waiters and waitresses have mechanisms in place to keep trays level. Your neck and your trunk have mechanisms in place to keep your eyes level. Because that's the best way we can process data. Okay? So levelance of eyes. Cervical extension, this is cervical flexion. It looks like it's not moving because maybe we've been introduced to these motions by literally moving the eyes. Moving the top part about the bottom part. That doesn't mean we can't. Imagine taking the slinky and doing this to it. Except we're doing it at the same time. That makes sense? So the top part stays level. It looks like it's moving, but it's not. That would be the first time Daniel bowed. It looks like it's moving because you see this and the eyes went from level to down. But I can be in a halo. You don't know what a halo is? It's the thing that you put around maybe a neck injury person to prevent them from moving. I can be in a halo. I can be in a neck brace and still do this. Why? Because that motion isn't happening at the neck. Right? So that's sagittal plane motion and illusions. Trunk follows the same route. Trunk flexion, trunk extension, in the fetal, out of fetal. I want you to take note of how little motion, and look, I'm tight. I don't have as much motion as the average gymnast, but the concept is still the same. You don't get a lot of stuff here. That flexion and extension that we have up here, you get half of it from one articulation at the top, and then the other ones contribute the rest. So we just because we can do a lot of this up here doesn't mean we can do a lot of that down there. if I don't flex my hips to help my functional circle, this is how much trunk flexion I get. In other words, bending of all the thoracic, all the lumbar in one contributional direction in one plane. Watch this. That's it. All that extra is hip stuff. Right? Think about when you're doing a crunch. You don't get very high up. You're doing a crunch, right? Because that's truly the bending of the trunk vertebra. You don't get a lot. You don't get a lot, but you don't have to. You kind of have the hips to help you. And you kind of don't want to get too much because, again, we're getting denser and denser and denser, man. We're protecting more and more and more stuff. You kind of don't want these things to have too much what we call hypermobility, too much motion. Right? So trunk flexion would be like doing a crunch. And trunk extension would be like coming down from a crunch. What about illusions in the sagittal? Looks like it's moving, but it's not. I think that would kind of be like a circle, right? Where I can rotate about my hips, keep my trunk in the same position, and it looks like maybe I'm flexing, it looks like maybe I'm extending. It looks like it's not moving, and it is. That's where you would, like, maybe if you were coming forward, but you want to keep your shoulders level, you'd have like flexion, extension, flexion, extension. It's easy to show on Roman chairs. Okay? But just remember, the slinky can move top over bottom, but it can also move bottom over top. That's the hard part. That's the illusion stuff. This is the easy part. The harder part is to see this. I'm going to have to go try to find a slinky. Apparently, Purell is out. Toilet paper is all out. And slinkies. I don't know, maybe they thought with the virus coming, they needed slinkies, to pass the time, I guess. Cervical motion, trunk motion, sagittal plane flexion extension. This is where things get a little different. This is where things deviate from our appendicular motion. In appendicular motion, right and left literally meant your right and your left. Right arm, your left arm. Your left leg, your right leg. Right and left means something different from structure that you only have one of. Right and left now means literally direction. To the right, to the left. Now dip, baby, dip, yeah. Remember one of the first weeks of class, you can tell a kid to do a cartwheel to their right, and I bet you they kind of know where you're talking about. Cartwheel to your left, spin to your right, spin to your left. So right and left means direction when we have one of something. So we have to differentiate between right and left lateral, because I can shuffle to my right, I can shuffle to my left, and right and left transverse. I can spin to my right, I can spin to my left. So right and left means something in two dimensions. Right and left doesn't mean anything in the sagittal plane. If I do a front roll, it's a front roll. There was no right and left about it, from my local perspective. But right and left mean two different things in two different directions, two different planes, frontal versus transverse. So, in essence, frontal plane, I'm glad this picture's up because I think it'll help illustrate. Frontal plane motion of the cervical vertebra is going to be bending to the left or bending to the right. We used to call it lateral flexion. But then we were like, well, that kind of gets in the way of the concept of getting in fetal, right? You're not going to get into fetal like sometimes. Yeah. So by referring to it bending, it allows us to keep what gets us in a fetal position consistent with flexion. So lateral bending, and we have bending to the left, and we have bending to the right. Left lateral bending, right lateral bending. Now, that is the robot world. Looks like it's moving, and it is. Start off point. The illusions with lateral bending. Before we get into what they look like, let's talk about why they exist. To keep those eyes level, man. To keep your eyes level. If you need to reposition your body in such a way to grab, to juke, to change direction, and your whole body wants to do this to your eyes, I don't process stuff well here. I process stuff better here. It looks like it's not moving, but it is. If I froze everything and brought everything back to anatomical position, my left ear is closer to my left shoulder. I had the left lateral cervical bending. So something like this would be left lateral. Instead of bringing my left ear closer to my left shoulder, I brought my left shoulder closer to my left ear. Y'all see that? Right lateral. If I went to do something like this, closer. Like when my boys, I haven't, when I haven't heard them in a while and I think they're up to no good, I might go in their room and what y'all doing in there? Left lateral. Because if my cervical stayed in anatomical position, I'd be like, left lateral. Follow? And if room was on this side, I'd be like, it's happening. But if I didn't bend laterally, I'd be like, and I can't see when my eyes are crooked. You process stuff better. You process stuff when your eyes are level. There was this, oh man, this might have been 10 years ago, but there was this challenge where you try to jump into a pool and like pretend that like you're just doing normal things, you read a paper or whatever. And what you notice is when people would jump vertically, they would always bend back the other way. It's just instinct, trying to keep its eyes level. But think about, especially in sport and activity, how many times your whole body moves in that frontal plane, whether it's changing direction. So having the ability to sway back your vertebra to be able to keep your head upright when you need is of high importance. Okay? Trunk follows the same rules as the cervical. Right lateral trunk, left lateral trunk. To and from anatomical follows the same rules. Right lateral from, left lateral to, left lateral from, right lateral to, right lateral from. What's to and from referencing? Anatomical position, thank you. Right lateral from anatomical, left lateral to anatomical, left lateral from anatomical, right lateral to anatomical. That's how it works. Trunk, let's talk about some illusions here. Right lateral to, right lateral from, left lateral to, left lateral from, right lateral to. For the trunk can bend and sway to help keep your eyes level, but you got a security blanket up here. What really the trunk helps to bend and sway is to keep your hands in grip on things. Functional circle of grip. Functional circle of work. Eyes are there as cameras to get you information, but what's doing stuff for us, feeding ourselves, eating ourselves, defending ourselves, is here. So if you're holding on to something or you're trying to keep your hands here and your body wants to take your hands out of that position, having a mechanism in place to counter that, to sway back, to keep your functional circle of grip is of importance, to keep your shoulders level. Okay? Here's an example of, and this is subtle, so subtle. Imagine you're standing in line for a while. Back in my day, When I was here at UL, we would stay in line, well, it was US, parking and transit, dude. Like, we would be in line for a long, long time. Now, most everything's digital. I don't even know if you need to go stand in line. But we used to, USL the joke was, it stood for you stand in line. That's what USL used to stand for. But this was before digital, so we had to go stand in line for everything. But my point is that if you're going to be standing in line for a long time, and you're trying to evenly distribute weight on both feet, that gets boring after a while. So what do? You kind of put weight on one leg, and then when that gets tired, you shift your weight into the other leg. And again, it's subtle. It doesn't look like there's a lot of stuff happening here, but there's a ton of stuff happening in the body. And I'm here to show you how it works. So let's pretend I'm in anatomical position. My pelvis is neutral. I'm not pouring water out the right or the left. If I go to shift weight on my left leg, I'm going to have right lateral pelvic girdle rotation because of my left hip adduction. Now, if my trunk stayed straight, if my trunk stayed in anatomical, my trunk would go along for the ride. Now my shoulders are pouring water out the right. Now my ears are pouring water out the right. And I could bend my cervical vertebra to look even, but that's kind of weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend my trunk back the other way to keep my shoulders level. Now watch how subtle. I had left lateral trunk bending. Just this little bit. Left lateral trunk bending. How do I know? Well, my trunk's no longer home. So if I went to line up my trunk, check this out. If I went to line up my trunk back to a straight line, I'd have to do this to line it back up with the pelvis. So that meant I had to bend to the left. I'm bent to the left. It's subtle, but it's there and it's important. But again, that's why we have this bending. Not just to help us pick things up, but it's to help us balance when our lower extremity is trying to take us places, and we have the ability to cancel out to keep our shoulders, eyes, hands level when we need to. Okay? Right lateral trunk, left lateral trunk. Left lateral trunk, right lateral trunk. Any questions? Because we're about to go into transverse world. It's the best. Okay. Hey, kid, spin to your right. Spin to your left. Hey, cervical vertebra, spin to your right, spin to your left. Right transverse, left transverse. Now again, all of the vertebrae contribute something, but they don't all contribute the same. I'm not saying they do. Remember in biology, we learned about that darn atlas and axis, and that's right. That's a lot of spin happening there, but not all. The others contribute a little bit as well. Okay? So this whole 180 degrees we get is a team effort, is what I'm trying to get. And you may have one superstar score 50, but you need the rest of the team to score another 50 to make it to 100. Okay? Let's get to illusions. Right transverse cervical, left transverse cervical. Notice before and after positions. Man, my sweatshirt's pulling on this cord. It's working me. Notice before and after positions. Start position, anatomical, in position, looking at my right shoulder. Wouldn't that be the exact same as this? Start position, anatomical, right down the middle. In position, I'm looking at my right shoulder. That was right transverse cervical rotation. It's tough for people who only hold global references. Because if you only hold global references, you want anything that spins this way to be right transverse and anything that spins that way to be left transverse. That's not the case. I can move the top part about the bottom, or I could move the bottom part about the top, cat and bottle. Okay? So the illusions really come from, I call it your functional circle of sight. Things, strategies, movement strategies that your body will do to keep your eyes on stuff. Gorillas can't do that. When a gorilla needs to look to the left, they have to move like, oh, they're going their whole body. We, imagine a ball player who's backpedaling and needs to reposition their body to run, but yet they need to keep their eyes on something. So how would you do it? You would do like this. Except instead of doing it in sequence, you would do it at the same time. So again, the illusion is it looks like you didn't move your neck at all. But the reality is you very much moved your neck. Because if you didn't, your neck would have gone along for the ride and stayed in the same position. You had right transverse cervical rotation. And it looks like you didn't, because most people only look at motion from the perspective of these global references. When I see my eyes moving, I move my neck. You can move your neck all the time without moving your eyes. In fact, you move your neck in order to keep your eyes still if you're trying to keep your eye on something. Okay? So, right transverse cervical, right transverse cervical. Left transverse cervical, left transverse cervical. The illusion that it looks like it's moving and it's not would be this. This is not right transverse cervical. And this is not left transverse cervical, because my cervical vertebra stayed in its anatomical position the whole time. Something was moving. My hips move. I can move my trunk. But just because I look to the left doesn't mean it had to happen here, and just because I look to the right doesn't mean it had to happen here. Okay? Alright, so far so bad. Trunk follows the same rules as the cervical. Twist to the right, twist to the left, twist to the right, twist to the left. You obviously don't get as much because you don't have these specialized atlas axis mechanisms up here. So I don't get like a full 180, but I get some contribution in the transverse plane of my lumbar and my thoracic. In fact, I can kind of compensate for the lack of more mobility up here with the fact that I have a lot more contribution down here. I have a lot more dominoes. I have more things that can contribute little bits. So I don't get a ton, but I get enough. Okay? Let's talk about illusions. It looks like it's not moving, but it is. If I take my pelvis and I spin it to the left, but yet I keep my shoulders facing forward, your instinct is to say left transverse trunk. Right transverse trunk. My trunk is looking at my right hip. Right transverse trunk rotation can allow that. Right transverse pelvic. Left transverse trunk. This is not easy. This is not easy. This is different. But it's important. And anything that's worth learning is. I want you to do something for me. Okay? If you don't want to do it, I understand. I'm not asking you to get up and cluck like a chicken. But we're going to cluck like a chicken. I'm joking. Your chairs, one of the cool things about this classroom is your chairs have a rotation component to them. Okay? And so what we can do is we can sit, hold on to your desk, get your feet off of the ground, and you can actually rotate your pelvis. Rotate the lower part above the upper part. And it's easier for you to see how when your legs and your pelvis spin to their left, it makes your trunk spin to its right. Go ahead and try it. Hold on to your desk. Make your legs go one way. Make your legs go the other way. Try to keep your shoulders straight. And notice how you go from looking at your right hip to looking at your left hip. And then looking at your left hip to looking at your right hip. And the only way to go from looking at your right to looking at your left is to rotate to the left. And if you're looking at your left and then you're looking at your right, the only way that happens is if you rotate to the right. I saved the hard part for last. This is not easy. But I save it for last so that we can build up enough practice and confidence with illusions so that when we get to the ultimate illusion, it might not be easy at first, but the more we play, the more we practice, the more we analyze, the easier it's going to get. And listen, for some of you, it's not going to be a gradual thing. I'm telling you, it's going to be a light bulb thing. You're going to be practicing something in the weight room or at home, and you're going to be like, I get it. It's like riding a bike. And when you were learning to ride a bike, man, everybody's giving you advice, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. And it made no sense until you practice enough where you're like, I got it. The trunk is designed to sway and to give and to move, not just like this. That's useful. But it's designed to sway and to glide and to move so that we can move our lower extremity where we need to, and this stays fixed when we need it. I got to teach you that. I have to teach you that trunk flexion is the same if we do this or if we do this. This is the same as this. I've got to teach you that. A crunch is the same motions as a reverse crunch. That's what I'm trying to teach you. That the bending that takes place, if you got a slinky and you do this, it's the same type of bend as that. And so by default, this is the same kind of bend as that. And this is the same kind of bend as that. And this is the same kind of rotation as that. It's the cap and the bottom. Okay? The cap and the bottom. Let's see. Think. Think of an example. I'll pull up an example on the board. Okay, guys, let's analyze. Let's see. Okay, cervical position. Is she bent to her left or to her right? To her left, yeah. She's left laterally bent relative to anatomical. Okay, let's see a couple others. Okay, is this guy twisted? So we're going to look transverse plane to the trunk. Is he left or right transverse rotated? Left. He's twisted to the left. It's good. Good confidence builders. And he looks serious. Not mess with that guy. Okay, Let's see if we get some others. Ooh. Guys, this is great because this is teaching about clues. This is teaching you about clues. Let me see if I can get some lights down. Let's look for clues. Look at his knees, right? Left lower than the right. That tells me that his pelvis is probably pouring water out the left side. Does that make sense? In other words, his pelvis, more than likely, is left laterally rotated. Now, his upper extremity is fixed. So the point is that if his spine didn't bend, he would have to be here. But he's not. He is there. So what does that tell me about the bending of his spine? In order to pour water out the left side of the pelvis, his spine has to be bent to its right. He has right lateral trunk bending in this position. He's right laterally bent. Do I expect you guys to understand all this stuff right now? No, but brother, the best way to kind of get this is just to toss you in the water and let you splash around a little bit and get you swimming. I'm introducing you to things we're going to have to be able to see. And I'm going to teach you tricks and techniques to see things like pelvic position, eye position. To formulate, I'm going to do some really horrible stick figures, but they're effective. So that we can see how the trunk here would have to bend. Okay, one more. One more, guys. I know y'all are antsy. I know. But we've made it this far. Come on, one more. All right, let's look for clues. Do you think cap and bottle can move the cap, can move the bottle? Do you think if her upper extremity represents the cap and her lower extremity represents the bottle, who's going to be moving? Is the top part moving in this exercise, or is the bottom part moving? The bottom, yeah, the top, unless she's like Captain Marvel, top part's not going to go anywhere. So let's look at it before. Where is her trunk position? What's her position relative to anatomical? Is her trunk twisted to her right or her left? Is she looking at her right hip or her left hip? Her right. She's twisted to the right. She's right transverse, trunk rotated in this position. Does everybody see that? No? Okay. Let's assume, we don't assume, let's infer that she is in this position and she gets up. She lets go, she stands up. This is anatomical, correct? So wouldn't she be twisted to the right? Ah, you see it now? It's not easy. But like it's the light bulb. It's like, I got it, and I got it for the rest of my life. So if she goes from this position to this position, everybody understand what I'm saying? She goes from here to there. How did her trunk rotate? Did her trunk rotate to its right or its left? Its left. How can I prove it? If she stood up and she starts here, and then she does this, and she did this, the only way to go from here to there is to spin to her left. All right, I can see your brains hurt. Well, have a good day.